Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers. Or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks to 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Elixir Mix. This week on our panel, we have Mark Ericksen.
Hey there.
Josh Adams.
Howdy.
Nate Hopkins.
Hello, hello.
You know, Nate, I don't know if anyone mentioned that you were going to be coming every week because I wasn't on your first episode. So did you introduce yourself and tell everybody how awesome you are?
I introduced myself, at least. Definitely fresh into the Elixir space and Phoenix space. Long-standing Rails developer with 10 plus years experience over there. So the world of functional programming and the Phoenix framework is all new for me.
Yeah, and what Nate hasn't mentioned is my very first programming job. I worked with Nate, and he made sure that I didn't screw things up too badly. So,
yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, it was. And he also works with Eric Berry, who has been on a panel before. So, anyway, we have a special guest this week, and that is Eric. It looks like it's Oestrich. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself and tell us why you're awesome?
Sure. So I'm Eric Oestrich. I work for Smart Logic LLC out in Baltimore. I'm in Indy, but I work remote. We are a consultancy that used to do Rails and has now moved to Elixir for about 2 years. So yeah, we've been running great in Elixir land.
Nice. It's funny because I saw the ExVenture repo in the prep information. And then I was looking at my calendar for this week, and I have pattern matching and your new ExVenture on my calendar. And it turns out that the local users group, there might be a reason for that, right, Mark?
Yeah.
That I guess we're talking about ExVenture then. So I might actually head over there and get a little more in depth. But do you want to just give us just a brief introduction to what that is and you know what we're talking about there?
Sure. So ExVenture is if anyone is familiar from the kind of late 80s to mid 90s, something called a MUD, a multi-user dungeon. It's a text-based game that you can use Telnet into. ExVenture is that, except, slightly more modern. There's a web administration panel, so everything is done through Phoenix. You don't have to type commands through a terminal in order to edit your game. There's a lovely web client courtesy of Phoenix Channels. Yeah, so it's just kind of bringing it more into the future and making it stupidly concurrent and all kinds of fun stuff.
Super familiar with MUDs. Definitely burned a lot of time as a youngin'.
So I'm curious though, for the audience, they can't tell that Eric is not an old guy. So when I was younger, I never got into it, but that was like the time of Zork and these big MUDs. I never really spent much time in them. I think maybe I was just a little too young for that. But Eric, so you're not a very old gentleman. So how did you end up coming into this idea of building a MUD and a MUD editor?
So I've always, the concept has fascinated me, I guess. I haven't really ever played too much of them, which is kind of hilarious in its own right. But just because it's like pure game mechanics almost. So you just, in college, I had written just a solo Zork text adventure, and I was in Python, and I spent a lot of time trying to make that threaded so that the world could happen behind your typing. Never managed to get that going, but kind of after that, I'd always wanted to do a MUD, but wasn't good enough in C to make that happen. Couldn't get it working in Ruby, which was my professional language up until Elixir, for many reasons. But then one fateful day, a little over a year ago, I started a Ranch TCP socket somehow and got an Echo server and then a chat server, and we have a MUD.
Awesome.
So
I just want to mention for everyone who's listening to this and maybe wondering why they should be interested. I will tell you why you should be interested. So ExVenture is an open source. It's hosted on GitHub. It is a non-trivial Phoenix and Elixir application. So, and that's the most important part. Like a lot of the examples that we see and play with often are fairly trivial. And so this one, he's really built it out so it is a significant system in itself. And what I love about that, and that's why I chose this for our Utah Elixir meetup, that we're going to be introducing it. And we're going to be using this as a thread for upcoming meetups and presentations, specifically because we can teach a concept like gen servers and then go and point to an example that is, in ExVenture, like this is how gen servers are used in here. This is something you can take home and play with that is a non-trivial application. And so I encourage everyone just kind of dig into it and just play with it, especially if you're learning Elixir, because it is an excellent playground where you can just get in and play with it. And you're not having to worry about, like, it is a game, so that makes it more fun, but you're not having to worry about graphics and rendering and anything complex like that. You're really just dealing, like you said, with game mechanics. So yep. I am also curious about where you wanted this to go when you started creating it. Like what made you say, I want to create this big thing and I want to make it open source? Like, where did that come from?
There's, I guess, two reasons that it's open source. One, I'm just a big fan of it in general. And the second is that work has partly paid for it. So as part of that, it I don't want to say has to be MIT, but it is MIT because of that. So we early on in the project, whenever I've had downtime between client work, that had been a common thread, and up until recently when it's become its own thing. But I talked with you, Mark, about Prometheus and like how you monitor your app and all that stuff. So that was done through some of our downtime and kind of research into like how do we monitor our Elixir apps and whatnot. So that's the other reason why it's open source.
Well, that's awesome, and I thank you for it because so I ran
into you, Smart Logic.
Yeah, so I ran into you at the conference, and you were showing me what you're building, and then you're showing me your Grafana UI for the graphs, and I was like, I'm working on deploying Elixir systems to Kubernetes with Prometheus and Kafka, and not Kafka, but Grafana. And I was like, how do you end up doing this? How do you end up sharing these metrics out? Because there's APMs like application performance monitoring, like New Relic and App Signal and other things like that. But those don't really show you application or domain specific metrics. And so that was one of the things I just loved. Like I was able to dig into your source and it's like, that's how you use these libraries. That's how you do it. So why don't you just talk a little bit about getting metrics out of your system?
Yeah, let's see. You set up what I've called instrumenters. I'm not sure if that's the typical term or whatever, but I'll have a module that's called, I think there's one called a player instrumenter. So anything that's dealing with a player metric, like you've executed a command, there's a specific command instrumenter. So let's go with that one. Whenever you execute a command in ExVenture, which is just typing out in the little terminal bar and hitting enter, that then we record the histogram data of how long it took to parse, how long it took to run, what command it was, and all kinds of extra data about it. That's still fairly generic because Prometheus, just the way Prometheus is set up, you don't want to be putting unique data in these metrics.
So part of my question, I guess, and let me rephrase this a little bit, is really when people are thinking about trying to get metrics out of their systems, what even makes a good metric?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of, I'm still trying to understand that myself.
Yeah. So
it's kind of whatever, I guess, if you were to look at a dashboard, whatever you would like want to know. So like I specifically want to know how long things are taking to run. If someone's trying to log in and they're failing a bunch, like is someone trying to hack into my system or whatever, to know that anytime I have stuff for if you speak to the local room, if you speak on a global channel, I'll have metrics for that. So just kind of see general activity, know that stuff is working. So like specifically for histogram data, which is the way that works in Prometheus is if you give it a bucket of points that it could possibly be. So that you could say like 0 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, 1,000 milliseconds, and so on. And depending on how long your command actually took to run, it'll get put in like that bucket. And so Prometheus knows how to deal with that data such that it can actually do real statistics and stuff that's above my head, but it looks like it works.
Yeah, that's cool. And so like, I think of like you mentioned, what would you want to see on a dashboard? And I think of like, well, with my system, we have business intelligence that we would like to know. Like one of the things that you have is like how many users are currently connected.
Yep.
And I can think of, if there's ever money passing through my system, like an order has taken place, I'd like to see that an order count and maybe a separate metric for an order amount. So I can see dollar amounts perhaps.
Yep. Yeah. So speaking of those for count like things, so you could have a metric that is, you'd call it like total order volume or price or amount or whatever. And so you would just increment it by whatever the amount of the order that it was, the Prometheus gatherer in the background. We should also point out that this is Prometheus.x on GitHub. So that's what I'm using. But anyways, so you increment the total. Prometheus is a scrape mechanism. So whenever it scrapes, it sees what the total is, assigns it a timestamp in its database. And the next time it scrapes, it'll grab the new total and it can like do the diff. And so when you do your chart, you can have it set up so that you can do an increase. And so you can watch the actual difference between the times that it's scraped across whatever amount you want, whether it be kind of down to the minimum you can do is how often it scrapes, which is 15 seconds for me. You can make that as fast or as slow as you want. You just kind of lose how granular your data is. So as low as the 15 seconds all the way up to, you could have it be across like the last week and then have it be per hour.
That's cool. So I know as you started building this, you ended up pulling a lot of libraries out of it, right? And creating those as separate libraries. So one of them that I think you're pretty proud of is Gossip. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So Gossip is a chat network for just kind of the whole MUD text-based community. It's built into ExVenture, so all you have to do is just give it the API keys and set up some channels, and then you're part of the network. But yeah, so Gossip is it's based on WebSockets. So this is a Cowboy WebSocket instead of a Phoenix channel, just so that we can dip below that Phoenix requirement because they do some extra stuff in the WebSocket protocol that I don't want to force on non-Elixir games.
So what kind of other clients are you trying to support?
So right now I have there's a Gossip Elixir client that's, I don't know, official, whatever you want to call it, because I wrote it. There's a JavaScript client that someone has made. There's also a node-based game called Ranvier, which is a MUD engine in JavaScript and runs on Node. They have a bundle system for that, so it's like an extra package type deal so any Ranvier game can connect to Gossip. There's also a Python framework called Avenia that someone is working on getting into Gossip, and Avenia is the biggest of the new frameworks, I guess you could call it. So yeah, there's a bunch of clients popping up everywhere. The one thing that we haven't done yet is a C client. And the reason that is important is because most of the games that you might connect to are like 30 to 25 years old. And they're written in like ANSI C and some stuff going on there.
So you can hook the existing, I guess, old school BBS MUDs into Gossip easily?
Not yet. That's the C client we're waiting for.
That sounds glorious. I will burn a lot of hours on stupid stuff when that happens.
So one of the other things that you spoke about at ElixirConf, and I'll put a link to your talk in the show notes so people can go and review that. But you talked about some of the things you learned along the way, and I would love for you to share that with some of the listeners. Like you went through iterations of performance, And I'd love to hear about like what kinds of things you found as performance bottlenecks and how you resolved those.
Yeah, so specifically the performance stuff. When I started out ExVenture, I decided that I don't care about how well this thing performs. Like, for some context, a typical MUD, if you have 10, maybe 20 players, you're like on top of the world. So that is like, if I can support 20 people on ExVenture, I'm happy. Woo, I've done it. So that was the starting goal of the project. Leading up to ElixirConf, I was just sort of curious how well this thing would perform, because I have a hosted version of it and mentioned it during the talk. I was like, oh, I don't want this thing to fall over during the talk. That'd be real embarrassing. Mm-hmm. So I just started doing some performance testing to see how well that would go. So I had it running on my desktop. On my laptop, I started a new project called VentureBot that just spins up, connects to the server. This would be a good Gen server intro as well, because it spins up a process per bot and just like connects and starts talking to the server. So started it with like 50 clients connected. It was working great. Was looking at my command metrics to see how well things were moving. Everything was kind of at like a 3 millisecond response time or less. I was like, beautiful, add more. So the first go around, I got up to 230 players or bots from my laptop. And then it just like came to a screeching halt. I might have seg faulted Erlang, I think. One of these times I did. It was really weird, but
did you just run out of processes, or was it an actual?
It definitely wasn't out of processes. It just like the Erlang VM just like shut off. It was just done.
That's fantastic.
So that was the first go around, and I ended up finding out that I have a room processes. So in MUDs, you typically move between rooms. So I have a room process, and that's how it does the concurrency stuff. So for every player that was in that room, in order to do communication or check to see who was there or any kind of thing like that, it did a cast and a call. And yeah, so anyways, it ended up being that single process was being massively overloaded due to being a router of sorts between players and NPCs and things in the room. So I ended up pulling off a side process that when you told the room to notify of like, oh, I just said something to the room, you cast it to the room process, and then it casts it to its side channel that then spins it out to everyone. So that spinning out to like rebroadcast to everyone was the slow part. So just getting that off the main process, just doing that got me to, I want to say 700 concurrent players. The next step that I took was the actual data that I was passing around between messages was gigantic. And this was because I was just sending like, I as a user just did this thing. And that user was a full like preloaded ecto struct. It had like all the skills you could do, your whole class, your whatever race you were, just like way too much junk to be passing around as part of a message. So I ended up simplifying that down to like your ID, your name, and maybe some like just a handful of attributes that might be useful for someone on the other end inspecting you. So dropping that down. Also, fun bit about this, I actually ran out of memory on my desktop, and my desktop has 64 gigabytes of RAM.
Wow.
So it was like a true feat. So once I simplified the message structure that was being passed around, I was able to push up to 3,200 connected players. And there's a few other tweaks in there, but those are the big things that ended up getting me from like, 200 players to 3,000 more players on top of that. After ElixirConf, I was just curious if I could like how far I could push it. And I ended up finding there's a few database calls that are happening while you're moving around, as well as your character just saves every 15 seconds back to the database. So if I unhooked like those two and like one or two more things, I could do another 3 times increment up to 7,100 connected players. Just like on the same machine.
That is awesome. So I just want to identify a couple of these principles that you walked us through. It's like the first step is the first major block was that you hit that point where a gen server is a single process, right? And depending on how we use a gen server, it can become a bottleneck for a system. So, all right, I can solve that by spinning off asynchronous new processes to do the work. So
I can say that I've already bumped into that with my first gen server.
Yeah, I think it's a common mistake when we start first coming to Elixir. I've seen it a number of times at least, where people kind of create a gen server treating it like an object instance, but they're not spinning up multiple gen servers. They're spinning up one, and then they have all these different processes talking to it, and it just kind of blocks it up. Yep. So how did you solve it, Nathan?
I'm still in the process of solving it, but it's essentially spinning off another process to do the heavy lifting. My kind of short-sighted thinking was enough to take down our site.
Oh yeah.
But so we reverted and went back and hard coded those numbers in, and then because there's some long running database queries that run, and I thought I was being clever by backgrounding that into a gen server. However, there is a call to fetch the stats, and internally it calls itself. So it's still a single process that calls itself. So it will schedule a message to itself in the future, and then that blocks, and everyone else is sitting around waiting.
Yep. So that's one of the big things I think everyone new to Elixir kind of has to cut their teeth on, right? That gen servers are single threaded and Phoenix is not, right? So you can get a lot of requests being funneled into one place. Yeah, so it's just an architecture kind of awareness of how we want to solve that. So the second one you mentioned was really large messages. And so that's one of the things, another thing I'm not sure very many people are familiar with. It's just that when messages are sent between processes, the data is copied, and it's because it is immutable. And so when it crosses process boundaries, right, that's when the data is copied. And you were sending around really large message structures. And so,
how large is really large?
I don't know if I ever actually calculated it, but we could sort of guess. So for every every 100 players was like a gigabyte of RAM in the before it was fixed. So however that ends up spinning out, but it was a lot. And that was mostly because every copy, once it got spun out, so a message when a new character enters a room, it sends a message to the room, says, "Oh, I'm here." And then that gets spun out to everyone that's in the room. So it's copied again to every single character that's in the room, again, that they just entered. So it just was kind of a cascade of like, "Ooh, I just entered." And
so you're sending one
that around. Yep.
Yeah. So one large message, like if you have 100 other bots in the room or players, then it sends out that one large message 100 times.
Yep.
Yeah. And so each one of those processes is now holding on to that memory for some period of time.
Yep. And until it processes the inbox.
And the third one that you mentioned was more around database blocking or could you clarify that one a little bit more?
So I think the real reason that the database was the reason that was holding me back at the 3,000 or so player count was because it's on the same machine. So it's just resource contention. I didn't look into pulling that off to a separate machine for the same trial run. Instead, I just kind of commented it out. It was like, well, we'll deal with database later. Let's see how far what I wrote can go.
Right. Yeah. Because a lot of that stuff, because it is it's an asynchronous save, you could probably just kind of send off those messages and say, oh, I mean, it's more complexity, right? But, an architecture could be like, oh, update my state with this information. And it could even look at it and say, oh, well, it hasn't changed since the last one because I held on to the last one. So I don't have to do anything with the database.
Yeah. At least, so part of the user save asynchronous stuff was, it was always saving irregardless of what was there, because I tricked Ecto into thinking that it was always new. So I set it to nil and then saved it. Okay. Yeah. So that there's a lot of things that could be better about making the save specifically faster.
But that's cool because those three steps you identified, I think a lot of people are likely to hit those at some point. And so I'm just grateful that you're able to come out and publicly share like, hey, this is what I learned. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah. And that was part of my ElixirConf talk towards the end of it. And I also did a blog post as well. I think the blog post has specific links to the parts of the file that we talked about.
So another thing that you'd built and extracted out, at least I understand that you did, was it Squabble? Is that?
Yep.
Yeah. So could you talk briefly about what that's doing, kind of where it fits into this architecture?
Yeah. So Squabble came about this May or April or so, sometime earlier this year, I decided like I need to learn how to cluster in Elixir because I've heard it's amazing and I need to make this happen. And so that's what the ElixirConf talk I did was like how I went from a single app like node to multiple nodes. So what Squabble fits in with that is that it is simple leader election for your nodes. So the way I went with ExVenture is that each node will be the full running application. And when they cluster together with the fantastic libcluster library, so they've clustered and they will start it's the Raft leadership only part of the protocol. So Raft is a consensus algorithm. This is just the leadership picking part of it with a few modifications because I think we can drop down on chatter since we're on because of how Erlang clusters. But anyway, so once the application starts up, you turn on your Squabble supervisor, and then it spins up its own stuff that starts talking amongst all the nodes in the cluster, uses process groups to deal with that PG2, and it's the Raft leadership election. So it's essentially I'm going to wait half a second. This other one's going to wait 0.4 seconds. And the last one will wait 1 second. So it's kind of this is for starting a leadership election. So the one that finishes at 0.4 seconds will send a message out to the cluster, hey, I want to be leader. And then the other two nodes will get it. They'll just say, hey, I vote for you. And whenever a majority of the cluster has picked a leader, then that node says, hey, I am the leader. And then from then on until it dies or enough of it gets net separated or net split off or whatever, it is the leader. And that's just kind of all it does is just know who the leader of the cluster is. There's a few set of callbacks that you can set. So like when a new leader is picked or I think a node dies, I also have a callback for that. And the reason that is useful for ExVenture is because when the world starts up, that is the thing that you only want to happen once in the cluster. So Squabble will pick its leader. It'll tell that node, hey, you just got picked as the leader. It'll send a message to the world master on that node, which will then say, these are all of the things that I have to start up. All the, specifically I have it called a zone, which is just a grouping of rooms. And so they say, hey, start these like 12 zones. It'll say, okay, node 1, you get these 4. So you get these 4. Node 2, you get these 4, and I'll start these 4. So it kind of spans it out across the cluster. And yeah, so that's something that should happen exactly once. Like that is, we should not have the world twice or 3 times or more times or whatever.
So that's interesting. Let me stop you right there for a minute. And so you're saying then when you're having a node or a cluster and I join, and I know that you mentioned that rooms are implemented as gen servers. Mm-hmm. So when I transfer from one room to another room, I might end up crossing off or being passed off to a different server or node, Elixir node. Is that right?
Sort of. It depends by what you mean by pass off. So your player session never moves from the cluster. So whichever node you happen to land on, mm-hmm. either via the web client or if you're connecting via old school telnet, whichever server you land on, that's where you're at.
Yeah, I guess telnet can't dynamically be rerouted, right?
Yeah. But I guess the magic of Erlang and Elixir clustering is that like once you are in the cluster, all these rooms are globally named servers, gen servers. So I just say, hey, I know that I'm in room 12. And I just send a message out into the cluster, hey, room 12, I'm here. And then specifically the global, because it's not, I think it's still via, but it's a different keyword anyways. So that knows how to route it back to the gen server wherever it is in the cluster. and then it just works. So like what you're talking to doesn't matter what node you're on, but you do not. Your process doesn't move between nodes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
I can say I'm going through the code base now of ExVenture, and I'm excited. This is gonna be very helpful in my path to get better at Elixir.
Yeah, and that's part of the point of ExVenture. I particularly want, anytime we're working on like a new Elixir client, like I want a spot that's already been labeled as MIT. I've written it, it's done, and I can just copy paste into this client.
Nice. So I just want to drop this in before I forget. You host a server that people can just join and just kind of see what it is as a user and experience it. And it is midmud.com, right? That's midmud.com. So I just want to make sure we mention that so people can play with it.
Yeah, so that has effectively your first hour of playing, I guess, just based on the sessions I've seen people play. So you'll go around. There's a town crier who give you a quest, and you kind of do a little tutorial, and then kind of just explore the world, combat monsters, and if people happen to be on, you can talk to them, whatnot. It's also plugged into Gossip, so if people happen to be online anywhere in the network, you can talk to them.
Entirely possible I've spent this call also playing Midmud.
I might have alerts for that.
That's awesome.
Yep, there we go. Player logged in.
I killed a goblin.
Yeah, I better not. I was playing earlier. I'll just get distracted, and we'll just kind of sit here in silence and then start gaming collectively with no video, and that will be kind of lame.
New podcast. Okay, so let's say I want to use Gossip to build a game, or just in general, I want to use Gossip. What is involved there?
So there you can go to, it's a pretty fun URL. It's gossip.house. It's the German spelling, so it's HAUS. And then you go to /docs. There's a full documentation on like what the protocol is. So you just kind of set up your WebSocket client in whatever library you're using or language you're using, and just start sending and receiving events. I have it set up to be, I guess you could call it a progressive WebSocket if we want to throw in some buzzwords. You start by saying an authenticate event, and you'll say what features of Gossip you support. The bare minimum is channels. So like if you're connecting to this, you have to do the public channels. So after that, you can do tells. There's a players. So tells are direct messaging, but it's typically called a tell in old school MUDs. And then there's a players flag that lets you see who's online in the network. So you can get sign in, sign out events to kind of keep your local cache live. There's a games flag, I think is the last one, that lets you probe Gossip to see what games are currently connected and get some more information about them. Like how do you connect, some description, like a better display name, stuff like that. So you just start connecting and sending events.
I wanted to mention that I downloaded it and was playing with it because I previously used it just to like browse the code, which was also very helpful, like especially when I was trying to understand how to do the Prometheus metrics and really getting kind of like business intelligence out of my app. And they're like, oh, here's an example of how I can actually see it in use. And so that was awesome. But then in downloading it, I just want to mention this as a tip. For me, it was the simplest way to do it was using the Docker instructions that you had, because I love that because it has a Docker compose and it brings up Prometheus and Grafana all hooked up. So I can just log into Grafana and you already have it set up with like, oh, and here's the dashboard for ExVenture. So I thought that was really cool.
Yep.
And so yes, like that gives people a great way to just kind of get started with like, oh, I can see how an Elixir system can hook into all these different pieces.
Yep. Yeah, that was done by a community member. That it was an excellent pull request.
Nice. So that is one of my questions is like, are you looking for people to come help out and join in? Or like what kind of contributions are you interested in?
Yeah. So if I have a public Trello board, it's linked on the README. So you can kind of see where I'm headed, I guess. So if something interests you on that, there's a Hacktoberfest there's 2 tags, one of which is a lot of things inside of it. So there's a Hacktoberfest set of issues. I have a Discord as well, where we talk about ExVenture, gossip, and all the other things that are going on in there. Yeah.
Nice. So it sounds like you've already been getting some people getting involved. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I got a bunch of new members on the Discord after ElixirConf. There's a bunch of people that like 20 or so afterwards came like, oh yeah, I used to play MUTs. These are great. Like I love that there's one in Elixir. I'm going to take a peek.
Nice.
And
so I wanted to mention, like, if people download it, one of the other tips that I just had to dig around a little bit to find it was in the seeds file is where you find out what the admin username and password is, because it wasn't listed on the README. So maybe that's something we could add, I guess. But yeah. So to save anyone some trouble, like if you're hosting it locally from the Docker install, it's admin is the username and password is the password. But what?
Yeah, and that used to be Eric as the login for the longest time until about 2 months ago. I was like, oh, I guess I should probably make that not be me.
Yep. But what I thought was fun is like just playing around with it, like in the admin panel, where it's really all around creating this game or this kind of world. I kind of got the sense that, this is generic enough that I could create a space game out of this. And it's like just describing, like, instead of rooms or dungeons, maybe it's like sectors of space, and so that seemed like, wow, that's totally a reasonable thing that this could do too. Does that make sense?
Yes. One of the things that I want for ExVenture is that it's not specifically tied to fantasy, just because that's what MidMud is. So I don't want it to be like a feature is geared only towards fantasy. It should be very generic. So yeah, everything should be good to go for a sci-fi, a historical, fantasy, whatever kind of genre you want to spin up. I hope ExVenture will do it. And if it's not, it's a bug.
What I love about that is I just got this idea. I could see like a Hacktober or a Hackfest kind of thing at a company. They could create a company one. And it's like the town crier is the CEO, right? And it's like introduction to the company. So now it's like, okay, well, now is your onboarding process. You got to go through this little mud and explore the company culture. And I don't know, you could have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think more companies should just be embedding fun MUDs for their user base anyway.
Like, little hidden things on their website, like, Stripe. Oh, you click this little button or you make this API call and now you're in a MUD in Stripe.
Yeah, there was if you Google search text adventure, open your console, you can actually play a text adventure in your developer console while on the Google page.
Wow, didn't know about that one. So what do you search for?
I believe it's text adventure.
I'll have to try that out.
I can confirm.
I'll have to drop a link in the show notes so people can play with that.
Fair enough.
One of the other things I kind of discovered in this whole process is that there's a whole, I don't know, subculture, I guess, or just a group of people that are interested in this thing that I didn't even know about. Like, I didn't know that it still existed. And your presentation kind of like, and then the fact that, there's all these other MUDs out there. So I just think that's interesting, right? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of games that are out there that are 20 plus years old and just have still been on.
Someone's maintaining those servers.
So what's your favorite old school mud?
So I've only really played two. One is called Aardwolf, AARD Wolf. That is just kind of a hack and slash run around. It's got like, I don't know, thousands of levels and whatnot. So you just kind of run around and kill stuff, and it's very hack and slash. And the other one is called Achaea, ACHAEA. And that one is run by a company called Iron Realms Entertainment. And that one has sort of inspired a bit of what ExVenture is doing in regards to the web client, because you can play that one over their web client. And that one's more of a role-playing, player versus player type thing. I haven't gotten too far in either of them, as far as you can with MUDs of spending thousands of hours. But yeah, so those are the two that I've mostly played.
Yeah, I will say I really like the web interface, at least, and the little status bars are really cool. Like if you haven't played it, you can open up MidMud and you have like a health bar that obviously goes down as you get slashed, and that's just really neat. And also the fact that you have like this expiring time on magic spells, and it'll tell you when you have one ready. It's just very cool. Definitely feels like modern MUD.
Yeah, and the action bars in particular, I pulled from my time playing WoW. So I'd like them to, in WoW, when you use an action bar, it kind of has a little timeout, like clock spin around, and like once it hits the top, it's done. You can use it again. So something like that, where it kind of probably, in my case, it'll sweep to the side, and like once it hits the end, it'll be done, and you can use it again. So just trying to take old school mechanics, but making it, making text-based mechanics and making them have a nice UI UX on top of them has been a big part of what ExVenture is.
You'd also mentioned that you kind of came from a Ruby background. I was just curious as to what your transition to Elixir was like. Like, how did you end up coming to Elixir? And, like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so some of my coworkers had been, this was 2.5 years ago maybe, have been interested in Elixir from a functional standpoint, mostly than anything else. So they had been checking it out, reading about Phoenix and whatnot. We had an opportunity for a 2-week project to just say, let's use Phoenix. Let's see how this goes. Here we go. So we started, one coworker did a 2-week project in Phoenix. It went very well. And then a few months later, we had a new client come in, and we just said, it's time to, we're just picking Phoenix. Let's see how it rolls for like a very large project. So I was tasked with that and kind of just learned everything as part of that project.
Wow, trial by fire.
Yep. Yeah, it was.
With deadlines.
Yep.
Yeah, so how was that coming from Ruby, it's object-oriented, you're coming to functional, it's like immutable data, it's more pure functional, and you have pattern matching. It's like, what were some of the, I don't know, if you could like turn around and like the person who's behind you coming along the same path, what kind of advice would you give them?
So for better or worse, at least at that time, Phoenix was still very Railsy. The web folder still exists. The web models folder still existed. So it was a lot less of a culture shock, I guess. You could think of all of your controllers as effectively a Rails controller. At least it has as how I had written them, which is try to like be as skinny as possible. And the weirdest thing was views being pulled out separately versus like a template. But you just make the view and work on templates from then on out, and kind of consider the view as your Rails helper, I guess. After that, it sort of fit, I guess, the Ruby I was doing at the time, more or less, I guess. Yeah, I really haven't felt like Elixir is a functional language, which is sort of weird because it definitely is. But yeah, it's just, I don't think of myself as a functional programmer, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, no, that's cool.
I was just going to say, I always tell people when I first was learning Erlang and I ran across the Telnet, like the SSH module, but also just Telnet in general, and realized, wait a second, this is like essentially standard library here. It was really cool. So MUDs were always on my list of things that were like an interesting thing I wanted to play with, but never did. And so I'm assuming you use the Telnet library from StandardLib, but I haven't looked.
So it's using Cowboy's Ranch, which is just the TCP acceptor, which I think uses GenTCP under the hood. So it's just the Ranch is the thing that sits on at the gateway to then let you in.
Yeah, I meant GenTCP and the SSH library. The SSH library was the cool thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and there has been there are a number of people out there that want people to move towards SSH instead of Telnet because it's secure. But my personal path forward to secure Telnet is just stick TLS on top of it, and then that way most clients don't have to update other than accepting TLS.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah, Telnet under the hood. Otherwise. I guess while we're on the topic of secure Telnet, which is sort of a weird oxymoron, but one thing that ExVenture does that if you connect via an old school client, such as there's one called Budlet that ExVenture supports pretty heavily, but if you sign in through that, because you're just doing plain text communication, ExVenture does not ask for your password over that channel. It'll give you a link that you'll go click and effectively OAuth your way in. So you'll get a link that's like attached to your Telnet session inside the cluster. So it gets a UUID on top of it, or as part of the link. You'll click it. You'll load the web page. It'll say like, do you want to authorize? Yes. You click authorize, and then you're signed into your session in the game.
That's really cool.
All right. Anything else that we should hit before picks? Sorry, this was all a lot over my head. So,
but you understand text-based games.
Yes, that I do.
Yeah, and yeah. So, like, really, just to kind of tie this up, I think there's a lot of value just in the work that you've done, Eric, and sharing it, and kind of sharing the lessons learned, the path. Specifically, if you're new to Elixir, ExVenture, the project, is a great one to start digging into. I can tell that you've used the Elixir formatter because like the style is all nice. It's like consistent, Yeah.
So, every now and then, I don't have it set up to run automatically, but every now and then I'll just run it and commit whatever it has.
Yep.
And it's mostly, I like to add trailing commas, and it's mostly just cleaning up after me.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, I've been introducing the idea of the using the formatter at work too, and because people get hung up on syntax, like, well, how do you like to do it like this? It's like, well, we'll just run the format and we'll do it that way. Yeah, so that's cool. But yeah, so I encourage people to just download it, browse the code. You can just browse it on GitHub. But download it and just kind of, or go to Midmud, see what it's like as a user. Download the code, run it locally, just play with it as an admin, whatever. And it's like we intend to use it. We have a meetup coming up this Thursday, and Eric is going to be coming in virtually talking with us as well, introducing this to our meetup group. And we're really excited about that, and just the idea of being able to use a large, non-trivial project as a teaching tool as well. So I encourage people to give it a try and play with it.
Yeah, and I have a lot of, all of Gossip is open source. There's also 2 separate projects that are part of the Gossip network called Grapevine and Raisin. All of that is open source. So if you're interested in, I guess, a fairly heavily interconnected set of Elixir apps, it's all open source. You can download it, poke around, have fun.
Nice.
So if people wanted to follow more of what you're doing online, I don't know, talk with you on Twitter, whatever, like what is your preferred way of people reaching out to you?
So my Twitter is Eric Oestrich. It's Oestrich. I'm sure there'll be a link. And my GitHub is Oestrich. And otherwise I'm on ExVenture has a Discord. And then the other place that you can find me that was going to be a pick, but I'll stick it here, is called mudcoders.com. It's a Slack for people who are interested in programming MUDs. So that's the other place that I would say you could reach out to me.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Mark, you want to start us off with picks? For you, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings.
Sure, I have one. It's this is kind of continuing on with sharing some of the things that are part of my build development chain, and one of those is the library ASDF, which I really like, and I noticed that you also recommended it in your development docs.
Yep.
And so ASDF, if you're new to Elixir, I just love it because it lets me have multiple versions of Erlang, multiple versions of Elixir. It even runs Node. There are other community plugins. I use some for doing Kubernetes stuff. There's a Minikube and a kubectl plugins, so I can have different versions of all these different things. So I love using ASDF for managing a lot of my development environment stuff.
Awesome. Josh, what are your picks?
All right, so I have two this time. One is just fun. So there's a TV show called Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and it's been around for a long time. And my co-founder introduced me to it, I don't know, a few months back. And I finally actually started watching it, and it has sort of consumed my background listening just because it's hilarious. So there's that. And then separately, I've been building some stuff in Elm, and there's a library called Elm UI. And the pretty sure the tagline is, "What if you never had to write CSS again?" It's very good. It's just an abstraction around UI that produces really good web UIs with nice behavior. So I don't know, if you're playing with Elm and you want to build a UI, you should look at it because it's amazing compared to doing HTML and CSS. And this is coming from a person who's done that for as long as he's been with computers. Anyway, that's it.
All right, Nate, what are your picks?
Well, I would say mentoring and pair programming, and kind of indirectly open source. So, for example, Eric is mentoring me through his open source project. But as I've been learning Elixir, I've been mentored, and I have mentored some folks that are kind of coming along behind me as well. And teaching and mentoring someone else is very helpful as well in terms of kind of expanding your own knowledge base. Other pick would be something that I know Eric has picked a lot on these podcasts, but it's Metabase. Metabase is an open source tool. It's a beautiful UI that sits on top of essentially any data store and provides ad hoc queryability into and discoverability of your data that you can kind of surface up to the business team, which is fantastic. It saves a lot of developer cycles, I have found in my experience with it. So it's been fantastic.
Nice. I'm going to jump in with a couple of picks. One that I've been enjoying lately, it's on Audible. It's a book called Monster Hunters International. Kind of a fun book. I'm not sure exactly how to recommend it, but or how to describe it. But essentially, it takes place in a world where all of the supernatural creatures, I guess, out there are real. And anyway, it's kind of fun. Got some pop culture references and stuff in there. My mom actually recommended it to me, which was funny because I've listened to most of the book at this point and really enjoyed it. And it doesn't seem like the kind of book that she would read, but she really liked it. So anyway, it's kind of an urban fantasy type book. A lot of fun. So I'll pick that. Eric, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, so I'll just echo mudcoders.com again. And then the other thing would be one of the community members there helps run the Elixir language server, and specifically the Emacs plugin called Alchemist and Elixir LS, Elixir-LS as well. So yeah, those would be my two picks.
That's Aldrich.
Yep.
Yeah, I know him. Trevoke on Twitter.
Yep.
Very cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for coming, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We will catch everyone next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.